My name is Celia Moleni, and I was born in Tonga. We moved to New Zealand when I was 2 years old, and my family name is Moleni, and my mom's maiden name is Elkington. I always like to introduce myself with my lineage because I think it's really, really important. If you were to take a DNA test, that's what you would see, Maori, Tongan descent. And I think that's really important. Now going to my licensure, I've been a licensed clinical social worker I've been practicing for the last 16 years. Fully licensed in the last, let's say, 6, 7 years, and I opened up my own agency called Manaki Mental Health to really cater to people of color, mainly and specifically people of the Pacific, to really come and receive mental health services that is culturally sound for them as well. Yeah. A lot of times my clients have sought me out because I look like them and have similar backgrounds as them. I do remember a specific time where I was seeking therapy and I didn't. At that time, it was like 15 years ago. I couldn't find someone that looked like me, so I just went to the route of LDS services, and we were placed with a person of color, and he was awesome. But then when he left, he transitioned us over to a female that didn't look like me. And the first question that she asked was, "What's your favorite cereal?" And I was like, "I don't want to answer that. That's not why I'm here." And so I really was very put off by that because here, one, it was already a hard time for us to get there. Two, I wasn't there to talk about my favorite cereal. And so I thought that was very insensitive and very disrespectful for her to just ask me that for the first time that in meeting me in this situation. And so I thought, if I'm coming here and I've already broken a lot of barriers to be here, and then I'm asked what my favorite cereal is, and then the conversation continued to be how awesome she was, that's very culturally insensitive. She did not see me, she saw herself. And so that's when I was like, I had already graduated with my undergraduate degree at Utah State University with my bachelor's in social work. And so I was like, I'm going to go back and get my master's degree. And I'm going to go back and be a therapist. And I'm going to start being a therapist because of this experience that I had. And so from then on, I just was able to work in agencies, get the hours and work. There was a time and point that I was working like 60 hours a week, seeing people every single hour. And that was beautiful. But I noticed in those spaces how unique our lens is as a Pacific Islander in the way we see people and also the way we are culturally sensitive because we come from culture. And so I think that I bring that in these spaces of being able to help people feel seen on a cultural lens that you don't have to explain or waste money in explaining. I can hear you and I can see you, and I'm not going to ask you what your favorite cereal is. So trauma is specific for the individual. We can probably grow up in the same household, same upbringing, but have different experiences. And so going into a little bit more of that, there's big T trauma, which you could identify as like a firsthand experience, sexual abuse, physical abuse, verbal, emotional abuse to a point where it is affecting your life in heavy negative ways. Thoughts that ruminate in your mind, it starts bleeding into your everyday life. And then there's little T traumas where it could be secondhand and you maybe saw a sibling get beat. Little T traumas can be like, oh, my sibling did this to me, not necessarily sexual abuse or physical abuse, but maybe said something that really hurt, but it's not necessarily directly affecting their life. Does that make sense? In the here and now. But it might come up in later years. And so those are just some things off the top of my head that can define trauma. And what I'm seeing in our community is that we don't know what trauma is. I get a lot of clients in our community who will say, I have just had the normal upbringing. And because I always have to go into their blueprint to understand what is going on today, because they are not coming in because of what happened yesterday. They're coming in because of the history of what maybe got them into this space today. And so it really is helpful to get the blueprint. And then a lot of times they don't identify with trauma. They don't identify with being physically abused. Sexual abuse, yes. And they don't identify also with being emotionally abused as well. And so a lot of times it's just labeled normal. And so when I get into, okay, what's normal for you? What was normal for your upbringing? What does discipline look like? And then you get into, oh, I had a woman in my office who was struggling with substance abuse, and she went back into her history, and she remembers like starting to slough class and starting to vape. And then when she would come home and her parents were like, what were you doing? And her dad was asking questions, she would start to answer, but then not remember what happened after, because she would get knocked out and then flown down the stairs. And so that was normal for her. But what I'm seeing across the board is there's similar experiences like this that are deemed normal. And so we kind of went into her history, and I said, I don't know if I would have turned out any much different than you had I been given the same blueprint. And I encouraged her. I said, you're doing fantastic for where you are and where you've been. And she wasn't able to see that until that point, because she thought that was normal. So now she started thinking, this is all me. I'm bad, you know? And so being able to dive into the details of an individual's life and kind of start helping them to see, to name it, to name what was happening, to validate them and their 7-year-old, 13-year-old, 18-year-old self that was getting beat for sometimes they didn't even know why, is very validating and healing for our community and what I've noticed. There's a big bridge or a gap in our people finding services or leaning into services. I think what I've noticed in my years of working with our people is that they wait until there's a crisis. They wait until maybe their kid is now saying, I want to kill myself, which is great. I love that you're bringing your children in for that. But what are the signs before? How can we really start accepting that mental illness is real? And how do we change the dialogue of from is this real to now how is mental illness presenting in not only in my own life, but in my children's life? And so I do see that there's a gap in our people finding services, and there's actually research that has shown that we don't seek resources and interventions because, and what I've seen is because there's a lack of acceptance of these issues, and then there's also a lack of resources. And so maybe we don't have insurances, maybe we don't have the funds necessary. A lot of times, my clients, because I don't go through insurances, one of the big reasons that I don't see clients sometimes is because they can't afford it. And that is really heartbreaking for me because I know that there's a need, but there's also this mentality of I can't afford it as well. And so it's not really the biggest thing on the plate, the most important. And I think we're also just getting used to the economy here. But the economy is not the greatest now, but just getting used to the Americas. And like my family, we migrated here when I was 12. I came from New Zealand, and we had a slower life. My mom and dad, they created a business. They ran a kohanga reo in their home. And my dad would cook us breakfast. He would drive us to school. When we came home, we had, sometimes we'd go blueberry picking when it was the right season, make blueberry pie. I could hear my mom's voice down the street when I was playing. But then when we moved here, it was fast paced. My mom got a job, which I was like, no. And then my dad got, he was the provider of our family. I never saw him until 10 p.m. at night, which is when we had dinner. And that was a huge shift for us. And so I think we are getting used to now from going, working the 9 to 5, or even for my dad, the 16-hour shifts to support his 11 kids, to this economy. So I think we are just kind of like getting used to the economy and the systems here generationally. Now I see a lot of us progressing further than that, and that's beautiful. But that's a big barrier, is finances, resources, and the belief that it's not real. I think mental health here in the Western Hemisphere is very foreign. I mean, not only are we learning English here, The way that we speak here is different than how we were talking about this, our language, Tongan and Maori for my own personal upbringing. We don't have the word mental illness. We don't have the word, I don't even think, is there a Tongan word for autism? There is for Maori, and that's takiwatanga. And it means in their own time and space. And so I think there's a big barrier because of language. You hear all of these medications that were prescribed because we have mental illnesses. Now, I don't fully subscribe to medications. There's a time and a place for it. But think of those. I don't even know half the names of those medications. And I'm a clinician, right? I'm not going to memorize those. And even the mental illness verbiage, bipolar, you know, this is a big one, narcissist, do we have that in our language? No. And so I think that's a big barrier also, is that this is not only a foreign country, this is a foreign language on top of a foreign language. And so I think that's a huge barrier. It's like, yeah, okay, mental illness isn't real because what the heck is depression and anxiety and all? And I know that our upcoming generation is very familiar with those terms, but what does that look like in our native tongue? There isn't any. And it could be seen as made up, and so I think that's a big barrier.
So when we look at physical health, it's like health is the whole sphere, right?
Yes.
And so when our body starts to get sick, it's a sign that something's wrong, and we need to either fix our diet, we need to exercise. There's a plan in place or actions that we can take to help us get back to a stable position where our body can function. Mm-hmm. And so I see mental health as the same thing. It's just inside of our brains. Mm-hmm. So our mental health is where our brain is at like an incline. And then over time, things happen to it where we're not taking care of it. And that's where mental illness comes in. And that's a sign to us that, okay, what kind of actions or things can we take to get back up here and heal our mental or spiritual or whatever is happening. So having that as an example, what is like a definition or something that you can give to viewers to kind of help break that cultural stigma of mental illness does not mean that like you're crazy and you're going to stay that way forever and there's just something totally like weird and wrong about you,
Yeah. Diabetes isn't crazy. Diabetes isn't crazy. And I think I love your example of being able to parallel mental health and physical health. And I think a lot of times we like to separate our mind and our body, but a lot of times what we don't process in our mind will stay stuck in our bodies and become disease. One of my favorite breathwork friends, she's like, when you have so much dis-ease in your body or in your mind even, it becomes disease. And so really being able to connect the mind and body is mental wellness overall. Mental illness is, I would say, because I'm trauma specialist, is unprocessed emotions that have now you can now visually see the effects of it in your day-to-day life. It's starting to bleed in your familiar relationships, your social relationships with your friends. You're starting to see it bleed into your career and into your physical health. And so those are some of the indicators that, oh my gosh, I'm struggling, because if we think of our mind, it is the driver's seat of our whole life. And if we're not taking care of the forefront of our life, the driver, then we are going to struggle with our physical health, and it's going to be a ripple effect into generations. And I like to really tell my clients, this is a big thing. You being here and sitting in front of me is a big thing. Not only are you healing yourself and working through the mental barriers and even maybe some of the physical barriers, you are healing 7 generations that came before you and 7 generations that are coming after you. And that's no small thing. And so that's how I like to explain mental health and wellness and illness. Some of the transitions that we had to face moving here within our community, Pacific Islander community, is to form place. And like I said, back home, being able to see how life was there, and then coming here to the fast pace, but also kind of like not being able to really be still and have conversations. Granted, my family was great in being able to like wait till we have dinner at 10. We're having dinner at 10 because that's when dad comes home and we can now have a family dinner. My mom was really big on that, and it helped a lot. But I'm seeing that these health issues, like you just named, are definitely correlated with our mental health state. And I think it is, we can pose a question, what comes first? But I would argue it's all mental health first. Um, Maybe, talking to some of my clients and seeing like the root of what is happening now, you can trace it back to mental health. That's just my experience. And so, what was it that made you start to rely more on food than maybe processing your emotions? You know what I mean? Than to now be able to even have a good relationship with food, right? And what foods are we taking? How much of our life and day to day are we moving, right? Physical health is very intertwined with our mind. I mean, it's just connected. And to separate the two is almost humorous, but we kind of separate it. And that's, I think, a gap that we might see in our community, is that we separate it so much that we neglect maybe the root cause, which is, I would argue, comes and stems from mental illnesses or mental disparities within our community. Instead of asking the question, is this real? It's now, how is this presenting in our community? Let's start there. How is mental illness presenting in our community? And if we start there, we can see that suicide rates are on the rise. Anxiety and depression are on the rise. And then kind of bring it a little closer. How is mental illness presenting in my own family, in my own home? Now, if I were to answer that question for myself, I would notice, oh my gosh, there's anxiety, there's maybe some spouts of depression with a certain child of mine. Does that make sense? And so being able to also have those questions first and foremost, and then bring it home to you. And then what is showing up in my own life? What have I struggled with? What self-awareness is one of the biggest tools to healing. It's the first tool to being able to heal self. Now I'll bring it to you. So community, to your home, to now, where do I see mental illness in my own life? Where do I see mental struggles in my own life? Let's start there. Culturally safe care can look like starting to be aware with self. I'm 40 and I have to be self-aware. Why am I yelling at my kids? Why am I crashing out, as you know, in their terms? And what triggers me in my home? Because that's where subconscious shows up the most. Subconscious, when I say subconscious, we operate every day, 95% of the time, from a subconscious level. And that's why we talked a lot about blueprint, because when I see blueprint in someone's life or their history, their upbringing, their child, their inner child, their, experiences, that's when that's the subconscious. And so culture, we talk about culture. In some of my clients' history, culture and in their home was a physical abuse, verbal abuse, and all these things. Now they're raising their own children, and inside their home, from a subconscious level, they're repeating these things. And so it really is, for a culturally sensitive way of being able to apply some tools in your own life right now, is to become self-aware. What are my patterns? What triggers me? Why does my kid trigger me when they look at me a certain way? Oh, okay. It's because when I would look at my parent a certain way, that was disrespectful. Or if I asked my parents questions, they would hit me. So now when my kids ask me questions, they, you know what I mean? I get triggered. And so I want to slap them. This is not my experience. This is experiences that I've heard in my office. And so self-awareness is, I think, the biggest tool that anybody can do right now to help them in their mental health journey and progress. And like I said, it's generational. And so start being aware of yourself and how you live life in your day-to-day, and start questioning that. Start questioning everything. So I was trained in EMDR, eye movement, desensitization, reprocessing. And That was like 6, 7, maybe 8 years ago. And this is evidence-based as far as being able to help people through their trauma or experiences with trauma. And I've used that in our community. And this is a way to kind of get into someone's subconscious without talk therapy. I kind of explain it as like borderline hypnosis, because we talk a lot about the subconscious, right? Um, we get to this part instead of staying on the 5% of just talk therapy. And so we ditch the 5%, we go to the 95%, and we go down this train ride together, and it's very rapid. And so it's a modality that I love to use within our community that I've seen. I don't even want to say this because it's kind of unethical to even say stuff like this, but 100% healing rate with EMDR, because it's amazing. That's just my experience. It works. And with our people, I feel like it works because you don't have to, it's a modality that you can ditch the mask, you can ditch the 5% and the presentation, and we can go to the 95%. Tell me what you really felt when you were 7 years old and your mom was, beating you. But that's not the question, but that's where we get to. Is to that 7-year-old self that can now express. And that's what I kind of said in the beginning of, like, you have grown Polynesian men sitting and weeping when just a session ago they were laughing at their experience. So that's what I've seen. And like I said, it's been so sacred to me and such an honor for me to sit in these spaces with our people. And that's exactly what I envisioned when I was in that office and was asked what my favorite cereal was this. I just wish our people could understand how powerful your mind is, how interchangeable it can be as well, that you're never too old to be able to heal. You're never too young to be able to develop skill sets to really set you up for life. Your mind is so powerful. And it's, like I said, it's the catalyst to either wellness or illness. And so if you take care of your mind, you can take care of the rest of your life. It just transcends into your family, generations, like I told you, generations from before you and that come after you. That's the power of your mind today. Like, there's no other you in all of the cosmos. Now, and also in the individual aspect of things, you are the only you. And so your mind is so unique to you. I was listening to a podcast the other day. If we were to do like a surgery and put your brain into someone else's, the eyes wouldn't fit, the ears wouldn't fit, you wouldn't be able to see, you wouldn't be able to hear. And so your mind is specifically designed for you. And that's very powerful. I think just knowing and understanding how powerful your thoughts are, how powerful your emotions are, and then your behaviors from your mind. I hope everybody understands how beautiful your mind is and how also it can work against you sometimes.